Hello everybody, my name is Tosh and this is my first in a series of video blogs. I'm beginning a new channel on YouTube and I hope to put forth some material that I've been thinking about that I'd like to share with all of you. And I'd like to take the opportunity to use this first video to kind of get to know me a little bit and define where I'm coming from and why I think the way that I do. So let me just warm up here a little bit. I like to use these videos in the pursuit of truth to define or to put forth some values or some principles that I think would be valuable to any person, and I'd like to share them. So first question is, who defines truth? How do you categorize truth? Who is qualified to say this is true or this is not true? In other words, if somebody has different faith values, to say, well, this is how life should be, or the other person says, well, this is how life should be. How do you define who's right? How do you define who's wrong? And who's qualified to make those decisions? And a lot of it is ideas and opinions. Some things don't really matter. If somebody likes green cars or if somebody likes to drive blue cars, it's not really a right or wrong issue. It's more of an opinion, and it's okay to have a little bit of diversity. Now, if somebody says, well, I'm looking at the grass and I say the grass is green, another person looks at it and says, well, I'm looking at the grass and it's yellow. Well, either their vision is flawed, maybe they have color blindness, or there are other issues that they would have deep down inside. For some reason or another, they just wouldn't say the truth. I don't know what that is. Now, that would be more of a clear-cut issue. It's either right or it's wrong. But more importantly, it's easy to define what's right and wrong if you look for the patterns. Normal, by definition, is what the majority of people do. We know that people are born normal or not normal by comparison with everybody else. In other words, if they're born with 4 fingers, we say that person is not normal. There's something wrong with that person because they only have 4 fingers. If somebody has difficulty breathing, the reason that science is effective is because by treating a certain number of patients prior to this patient, they know how to treat this patient, because everything inside the body follows a pattern. Everything is the same. There's always 2 lungs, there's always the same number of ventricles in a heart, there's always 2 ears, there's always a nose, and the same number of teeth. So medically, this is how we define normal. This is an anchor. This is a landmark, if you will, so that we know whether we're right or wrong, so that we know whether we're in truth or not in truth, so that we know whether we're doing things effectively or properly, or ineffectively or improperly. It's all defined by normal. What is normal? Who is normal? And normal is defined by the majority. So the same principles that we use to define things medically, we can also define things scientifically, spiritually, emotionally, and it's all based on following the patterns. We're looking for a pattern that transcends time, that transcends all culture, that is true in every situation. And as we bear down deeper and deeper into the collectivity of all humanity, then some things, more and more things begin to drop off, and you're left with a boiled down solid truth. You're left with whatever is left after you've done that and gone that far with that many steps, you can pretty much say is truth. Back to the physical example one more time. If you take all of humanity and you look at all cultures and you look at all persons all through time, studying hieroglyphics and literature, and bear down as far deep into history as you can, you're still finding people with 2 ears, you're still finding people with 1 nose, you're still finding a pattern. Same with social behavior. You'll find that there are specific gender roles that transcend all culture, that transcend all politics, that transcend every point in history and every point in time. You'll find that there are certain social behaviors and certain roles that people take. And it's very, very easy to only see our culture, our time, our government. You see a big difference even just stepping out from the government you live in now and placing yourself into a foreign or a different government, something that is new to you. You see new culture, you see new ideas, you see new viewpoints, and your definition of what is right and wrong begins to expand bigger and bigger and bigger until you're more and more accurate. Obviously, the more people, the greater, in any scientific experiment, according to the scientific method, the greater the control group, the more accurate your results will be. And so from a very, very scientific approach, I approach these issues. It's not necessarily about right or wrong. I try to steer away from that. I try to bear down into the principle of the situation. So, just reading through here. There is a quote that says, "Although you cannot define specifically what any one given man will do, you can predict with accuracy the average man." So again, we're coming right back to the patterns again, how people are very predictable. The same with science and the medical. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's talk about principles. Principles are defined as established truth that can be relied upon without regard to any circumstances. Rules are shortcuts to getting to the root of an issue or boiling a given situation or circumstance down to the real issues that are at play. And I know that I'm being very non-specific, but that is the nature of the principles. I want you to think more in terms of principles and less in terms of what people around you are thinking. How do you define your process of knowing what's right and wrong? Is it because those around you are excited, are very emotional about a certain issue or a certain response? Is that how you define what's right and wrong? Do you define that by what is easy, what is convenient? I just really want you to re-examine what you're using as a basis to define what you think is right and wrong. And I want to challenge you in that regard. So principles. Principles are givens in life that are always true when employed and applied properly. Which leads to the first principle, and that is the belief in absolute truth. Yes, there is an absolute truth. It does exist. And again, one more time, defining that absolute truth is by taking the largest chunk of control group and data as possible, boiling it all down and seeing what is similar in every situation, here and here and here and here and here. And you keep what's the same, and what's not the same you can throw away. And you only hang on to those things that you see that are the same in every single group. And by looking at that pattern, then you can accurately define what is true. There is an absolute truth, and I'll get back to that more later. In a given situation, it is very likely there could be a right and a wrong answer, depending on that particular question. So there's two ways to approach philosophical thinking. The first is a very political way, and that is by trying to be non-offensive to as many people as possible, to maintain the greatest audience at all times by watching what you say and always careful. It's almost like running a political campaign, like you're running for an office, to maintain the greatest number of viewers on my YouTube channel, for example, by not letting people go away. And this is the same with marketing tactics as well. If you're trying to sell a product, if you're trying to sell this, you're very careful not to offend certain viewers or certain followers because you want people to buy as many of these as possible, obviously. Now, the second avenue of thought is plain truth, just kind of putting the blinders on and just bearing down hard on these patterns and just being very mechanical about it, non-emotional, taking emotion completely out of the picture. Is a very scientific way to do things. And just putting the blinders on and just looking for those patterns, regardless of how it affects people politically, regardless of who likes it or doesn't like it, and just taking all of that completely out of the picture, making that those all non-issues. Those are not scientific issues. If you're trying to do a mathematical problem, or if you're trying to solve formulas, or you're doing algorithms in research, those are all very scientific things. They're non-emotional. Emotion plays no part in science, none at all. And so when we're talking about science and looking for these patterns, I believe it is very, very important to take emotion completely out of the issue. And I'm not saying to not be an emotional person in order to think in this particular manner. There are times, obviously, that this just would not be one of them. I take the second approach. I favor that, and it is also going to be what my attempt is when I put forth these videos on this particular channel. I'm not going to take the political approach. I do not intend to offend anybody. That is certainly not the purpose. But I'm making all of you non-issues. I'm making your feelings non-issues. And to make feelings non-issues does not mean I am offensive. I am not trying to be offensive. I am just taking that all out of the picture. It's just a non-issue to me. I'm just looking only at the patterns that I see. And I'm going to share those results with you. And many, many times and very often when you hear the results, it will ring true inside of you. Because innately, I think this process happens behind the scenes in our subconscious many, many times. Even though we may not be aware of it, we're also aware of the patterns. And it's very often how we know right and wrong. By doing this process without even really being aware of it. Excuse me. So, plain truth may be received by a much smaller group than the political approach, but it can carry that smaller group much, much further than all of the masses combined when you take a political approach. Excuse me. Another value or another principle that I think is important is that there are certain things that every human being should have, and coming in contact with another human being should be a priority. Every human being should be free of emotional burden, free of extra baggage and weight. You can't live that way. Long term, you're not supposed to live that way. It's never intended to be that way. So as number one on the list, to be emotionally free, to not be weighed down, to not be under guilt or condemnation or bad feelings or things that keep you from being liberated inside and free. And there is a spiritual aspect to this, obviously, and I believe in a spiritual aspect. I believe in God. I believe in a creator. I believe that there is a divine intent. And I believe that obviously with this many patterns in life, clearly there had to be an author. There had to be a divine signature involved in order for these things to happen the way that they did. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I don't believe in speaking in disclaimers. I don't believe in saying, I believe this, but then I'm going to tell you, I don't believe this, I don't believe this, I don't believe this, I don't believe this. I believe in just saying, I believe this, and just letting it speak for itself, rather than worrying about everything that you may think or that you may say. It's just non-productive. It's just not the approach that I favor. So, I believe that, yes, people should be spiritually free. People should be spiritually tuned in. This should be a goal for everybody. This should be something that's important for everybody, and never settle for less. So that is a principle. If it makes you feel bad, if it holds you down, if it keeps you bound forever and ever, for years, it's not a good thing. You're not doing it correctly. There's something that you're not doing correctly, because it's just not the way that it's intended to be. So, there's another school of thought wondering, is it correct if it's divine, or is it correct if it's innate talent? For example, somebody that plays an instrument, if they were just born just naturally just playing that instrument and they just required no teaching, and you can just tell, that just seems like it's a divine gift. That's everybody's feeling when they come in contact with this person. Or the second is somebody who is very assertive, somebody who has goals and some vision, and then they don't have from day one this particular ability, but they practice it and they develop it and they cultivate it, and they end up getting to the same place. So which one was divine, or which one was inspired, or which one was anointed? Which one is the spiritual one? Well, I don't know that it really matters. Does it really matter? The same thing with somebody who has a word or preaching, or teaching more so. Somebody that wants to put forth the knowledge of explaining how this water got in this bottle to the first men that walked this earth, when they seen this and they looked at it and they didn't know what it was, to have the divine inspiration, to have God come down and just speak and then just give you the revelation. Oh, well, this is water from the future. They made this plastic. This is the chemical process to make plastic. They had a machine that drops the water in. They purified it and screwed it. And this all came down through divine revelation. Or you have the other people who just said, we're going to figure this out. And they just did the research and they did the science. And many, many, many years later, they come to the same conclusion. And they learn how to make plastic. They learn how to put the water in the bottle. Which one was divinely inspired? Well, I don't think that it really matters. You're coming to the same result. So if you have a word from God, for example, and let's say that you're just a normal person, just an average person, you don't stand out in any way, but from time to time God may come down and maybe just give you a little bit of inspiration, and you speak some inspiration to somebody, and then it goes away and you go back to being a normal person until next time. Or the person who has it resonant inside them and they have a little more control over it, and they can almost, it just seems like almost at any given time they could put it forth and they could just say a word to somebody. I don't think that it really matters. I think the results are what matters. Obviously, if God had a purpose and he wanted to accomplish that result, whether he does it this way or whether he does it this way, it doesn't matter. He still did it. So it doesn't, I just don't think it really matters. God works both ways. In one individual, there may be a reason why he needs them to cultivate it. He needs them to put effort. He needs them to develop a talent. There may be a reason behind that. And I don't know what it is or what it may be. But obviously, if God has a purpose involved, then there must be a really good reason. But the end result is still the same. So if God wants to touch this person, whether he uses the person that uses this